right? And because one thing I've learned over my career, especially as it relates to customer feedback and insights, is people want to know what customers are doing, right? It's very rare that somebody just goes, I don't care what customers say, right? We all have some awareness that customers are the ones that pay our salaries.
Welcome to the Human Insight Podcast, where we share with you the business stories, ideas, and trends shaping the future of customer experience, told firsthand by the experts themselves in thought-provoking conversations.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janelle Estes, Chief Insights Officer at UserTesting. Welcome to this episode of the Human Insight Podcast. For many Americans, the Memorial Day weekend marks the unofficial start of summer. Think of family vacations, grilling in the backyard, swimming at the pool or the lake, and enjoying the longer days. It's also the time where we start to see and hear more advertising and other brand messaging for things like travel and outdoor activities, yard and home improvement projects, and even events such as Pride Month, the 4th of July, and going back to school. But consumers are also living amid the third year of the pandemic, rising inflation and gas prices, the Russian-Ukraine war, and other national and global violence and issues. So we wondered, what advice do people have for brands to consider so that they can be both human-centered and innovative as they advertise between Memorial Day through early fall? Here's what they had to say.
Like I already said, inflation. People are wanting to go out and experience things. We spent 2 years not doing as much. And so now we just want to get out there and do stuff. But now everything costs so much more. And, you know, you only get like 17 summers with your kids. And I feel like we're feeling like we're being robbed of part of our kids' summers. And so we want to give those kids a memorable summer, but we're also realizing that it's going to be more expensive.
I think they should recognize that, money is really tight for a lot of people, and everyone's just kind of on edge with the pandemic and like with the shooting today and, the war in Ukraine. So I think they should just be very real, very authentic, very genuine in like their mission and values and what they're all about. And I think people are really responding to kind of mission and values these days more than any time else in history.
You should consider it all. You don't want to alienate anyone. As an advertiser, you want to bring as many eyes and ears to a product as possible. So in terms of just business, you want to be, all of those factors would come into play. But you're going to understand who are you affecting greater, because that's what the bottom line comes down to. Who is going to be the greater good for you?
I think to some degree, when I read those things, the pandemic, inflation, global conflict, politics, race, inclusivity, all largely important and not good to shy away from. I would say it depends on the brand, though. I think people have heard so much about all those things. I'd rather just get a good, a good creative laugh and kind of get lost, forgetting about all of the things that are going on right now.
I think the biggest thing I would look at in terms of the pandemic and inflation and what's going on is just the brands would show inclusivity. They would have to relate to me. They would have people that it's not just one group, but it's really showing inclusivity in the campaigns. And I think that, to me would be some of the factors that I would look at.
I think it's increasingly important to keep embracing diversity in your imagery. So going back to what I mentioned before about the 4 years ago, the Weber grill, to have people of every age, gender, and race in those images so that it feels like it's more inclusive and sort of paints a picture of what I think we all should want, and that is to be, have an equal opportunity in life to get these products or this service that are being sold. I think that's the most important thing.
So, I mean, obviously the fact that we're in a recession after the pandemic it's something that I think you have to be cognizant of. People are struggling. Prices have gone, inflation, as you said, but prices have gone up. The cost of gas, just cost of living. I don't think pay has increased for a lot of people compared to the cost of goods and services. So I think just that people aren't going to have a lot of money, but people are looking to connect with other people. People are looking to get back to normal as possible. And then obviously, just in light of everything that's happening in our country, but then our world, it's a challenging time for a lot of people. And so I think just you just got to keep in mind the sensitivity of, just that in homes, people are struggling, but then also there's just, there's a war going on that's devastating. There's school shootings, there's, massacres at grocery stores and things like that. And so there's just a lot, it's kind of a heavy time. And so I think just a sensitivity to where we are as a nation, and honestly, even bigger than that as a world.
Wow. It is a challenging time for everyone. The insight I heard were around the themes of inflation and rising costs, inclusivity, connection, and on the other spectrum of that, escape. As a mother, I definitely connected with what the first contributor said about only having 17 summers with your kids and wanting to create positive memories for them. This could be an opportunity for a brand to bring back nostalgic memories, such as Coca-Cola's Summer Tastes Better campaign from 2021 that included short poems on the bottling that evoked the feeling of summer. It could also be a chance to highlight a DIY project or low-cost alternatives for consumers. Finally, a brand could look to highlight opportunities for connection and how people can connect with each other, their families, their friends, and their communities. What takeaways did you have? Now, on to our interview. Hi, everyone. I'm Janelle Estes, Chief Insights Officer at UserTesting, and today we're very excited to have Adam Thomas joining us on the Human Insight podcast. Adam is a lead product manager at SmartRecruiters, as well as a speaker, consultant, and technologist focused on strategy, team organization, and product management. Thanks so much for joining us today, Adam, and welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Janelle.
So you've had a lot of great experiences within product management. In your opinion, what do you think a product manager's role is within a company?
Yeah, after about 15 years of doing this, I think it boils down to this one sentence. Ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So the role of a product manager inside of a company it's one thing and one thing only. How do you help the team / organization / company around you make better decisions consistently? That's it. It's not about what you put out, right? Product managers have no discrete output, right? We don't put out code. We don't put out slides. We can do these things. But for the most part, if you're in an organization that does that, probably either very small startup or it is a waste of your time, right? There's nothing as a former engineer, architect in my last life, there is nothing I hated more than somebody from a product stripe telling me what the system looks like, right? And so that's a trap. Or as a product person coming to the designer and saying, I think the interaction should look like that, right? You're not a designer. You're not an engineer. You're not a salesperson. You're not a marketer. You're a product person. And your product person job is all around decision science. And again, the shortness of that is, how do you help people around you make better decisions consistently?
Got it. So making better decisions consistently, what's the input for that? Or I'm sure there are multiple inputs, but how do you arrive at a place where you are confidently making better decisions?
Do you ever? I think in truth, it requires a comfort of the unknown and the ambiguity, knowing that, right? I love that you used that word confidence, right? You're never going to be 100% sure. It's not a binary decision. you have to be confident in this ambiguity and then going without ego to talk to as many input or as many sources as possible to try to create a cohesive picture, one that you can share broadly, right? The idea is to get everybody playing on the same field as much as possible. And from there, then everyone can take their expertise and then apply it to what the game that you're playing, right? And you may translate game into strategy.
Yep, I get it. So tell me about bringing people along. You mentioned it's the product person's role to go have conversations, talk to people, perhaps share that back. I mean, I know it's probably asking the obvious, but like, who are they talking to and what are they bringing back to the team? What do you've seen a lot of product teams, worked with a lot of product teams. What's best practice there?
You talk to everybody, right? But I think in when I talk to PMs, right, in my organization or in others, right, the trick is to find ways to grab inputs from everyone that has stake in the decisions that are being made within your particular area. So it's very easy for folks to get hung up on thinking about people that have direct stakes, the people you see every day, your designers or your engineers or your bosses. Like, it's easy to go and say, I have to talk to the CEO once a month, right? Easy. Not so easy to realize I have to go talk to support, or I have to go talk to marketing, or I have to go talk to customer success. These end up being traps, right, for folks, because your job really is about decision-making, right? And bringing folks along on that ride. And so when you take these inputs from the people that have stakes in your decisions, you take it all in and you start to craft what the story is. Because as human beings, we really interpret story well. You pull it into metaphors and allegory, or however you'd like to do that, and start telling that story back, right? If it starts to resonate with people, and people start to repeat things back to you over and over and over again, you're starting to get somewhere where you have real alignment. There is a trick, a mentor of mine named Chris Butler, who's a fantastic product person, would tell me, and he would say, go ask 3 random people that are affected by your decision, what are the 3 most important things that your team is doing? And if they cannot give you a similar answer, then you're not bringing that alignment, right? It's not there. You're not talking to enough people, or you're not talking the same story over and over again. So one of those 2 things you have to go fix.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Or you're just not, or the people on the team aren't aligned, right? It's interesting. I've had similar conversations, and you mentioned talking to different stakeholders internally, but also would love to get your perspective on pulling customer feedback in as well. I always say, if you were to go ask a handful of people in your organization to summarize who your target customer is and what they need from you, if you're getting different answers from those 5 or 6 different people, that's a problem. So it's very similar to what you just said around internal stakeholders. So how do you think about external stakeholders and getting customer feedback?
Oh, that's perfect, right? What you just mentioned, right? Like, if you don't have an ICP, and one that folks are aligned with, and ICP means ideal customer profile for folks, right? If you don't have a target group or idea that you're going after, then it all kind of shatters, because sales might be going after something, marketing might be going after something, engineering might be building for something else. And so the story fragments. I think this is what user testing is great for, right? Not to be the person that plugs the product on the podcast, but we're currently users, right? SmartRecruiters, and going out and talking to customers and collating that information and being able to share that to start to weave that story. Because to your point, right, there's an internal side and an external side. Both are very important as it relates to building that story for people to follow. And as I mentioned, the game that I mentioned earlier, that strategy on where you want to go, right? You need to have some concept of what's happening outside, what's happening inside, put it together, make a wonderful story, and say, we're going in that direction, right? And that's how you set up strategy as a product person moving forward and taking the things that those inputs and creating an output that helps guide better decisions consistently.
Mm-hmm. Hey, you've created a framework called survival metrics. Can you explain what that is and what it does?
Survival metrics is a tool to help us get away from sunk cost bias. It's a way for us to take a look at how a product is progressing and make decisions that will help us pivot if needed around 3 buckets. There is a bucket of stop. There are things that will help us stop immediately, right? These are things that we should cut everything off and turn off the lights and move on. These are things that there are things that are pivot, right? These are things that we should sit down and talk at the next, if it's a train, the next station, right? We get to the next station, we'll sit and chat about it and figure out if we should get off the train, should we change the directions of the track, whatever, however you want to go forward. And then lastly, which shouldn't be forgotten, is this concept of invest. And so there's nothing worse, I think, as a product manager, going to someone and hearing the phrase, oh, if I had just known you were going through that, well, I would have given you an extra 3 engineers, or I would have given you an extra, I would have given you 3 extra months, or I would have, given you the world if you needed it. You just didn't tell me, right? And so it's important to establish what are the things that are going to drive success and more investment into your products. And so the trick with survival metrics are these things are agreed upon prior, back to your story. And from there, you're able to avoid a lot of the bickering and back and forth that may come up when somebody hears about something for the first time and goes, whoa, what's that, right? You now have something that you can point to and say, no, we talked about this, right? If we run into this, we're going to stop. And that makes the motion of pivoting so much faster and so much easier.
I like the idea of having a framework, right? That helps you, back to your point around helping the company make just better decisions, having a framework that helps you make these very discrete decisions about stopping, pivoting, or investing. My next question is, what lies underneath that? Like, what are the things you consider to ultimately arrive at stopping or investing or pivoting? Or is it different for sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No worries. And I think the end of that question, right, is it different, right? It's always different. Everything is contextual. In coming up with this framework over the last few years, one of the things that the thing that I hate is conferences, right? And what I call conferences is when somebody gets up on a stage and goes, this is the perfect thing. If you just follow these 3 things, you will have a perfect product team and everyone can go home happy and your CEO won't be yelling anymore. CEOs always yell. So there's no stopping that, right? I think at the foundation of survival metrics are 2 foundational things that I think a lot of product people can relate to. And both of these are things that we should keep close, but things we don't tend to, unfortunately. One is the Agile Manifesto, and particularly the 4th tenet, which is responding to change over following a plan. Far too often, as product people, we end up looking at our roadmaps, we craft them, and then we go, well, I guess I'm building this. Whatever happens after that, I don't know, but it's on the thing. We've decided, we've made it. We're going to go ahead and do that, right? Which is anti-agile. We're supposed to be able to pivot based on or respond based on the things that are happening around us. I think it's a core tenet of the Agile Manifesto, and one I think most teams should be thinking about as they're building. The second is a stat that was thrown out by Dr. Ron Kohavi, ex-Airbnb, ex-Microsoft, ex-Amazon. And he ran innovation for these companies. And the thing that he said was 60 to 90% of ideas do not improve the metrics they were intended to improve. In fact, they have neutral or negative consequences. And so let's say you don't even believe the 60 to 90%. Let's say you believe in half of that. How many ideas, for folks that are listening, how many ideas have you just said, this is not good enough? I'm just not going to go with it. Or how many products have you rolled out and you said, this wasn't working for us. And we need to get rid of, right? Both of these things, right? And I think a piece of that is survival and a piece of that is success metrics. Either way, how often are we not following through on the fact that 60 to 90% of ideas do not improve the metrics they were intended to improve? How often are we actually thinking about that? Or to make it a lot easier, when's the last time you stopped a product? When's the last time you stopped an idea in discovery? When's the last time you recalled a product? When's the last time you decommissioned a product? When's the last time you killed something? Because even if you don't believe those numbers, and again, even if you have them, right, there should be a regular process in which you're doing these things. And so those are the foundational things that this is built on. It's understanding we're not clairvoyant. And in fact, right, it builds on that product sense idea, right? We don't have product sense, right? We have the numbers. We know how successful ideas are on their first try. And inherently we know this, but we need some sort of way, because of human bias, to take a look at what we're making and to create these stops, these governors for ourselves and our teams. So we're able to follow through on, the biggest revolution in tech, right? Which is the Agile Manifesto. We could actually follow through on these things and think about outcomes over just pure output, pure things that we're tossing out.
Yeah, I think it's a good, when you were talking about kind of the framework and the decisioning that kind of goes into it, you mentioned success metrics. So I'd love to better understand, or perhaps have you share with the listeners, like, in your opinion, are survival metrics and success metrics two different things? And if so, like, how are they different?
Yes. And I think both are necessary. So what's the difference between survival and success metrics? Well, survival metrics are focusing on the product as it's being built. What is going to allow this product to survive the process of getting out the door? And thinking about the things that can affect that, whether that's internal politics, whether that's specific data, whether that's speed, whatever it is, because our companies are complex systems. So it's important to treat them as such and to bring in the information as clearly as we can to give ourselves governors. Success metrics are all about, how do we know this is a successful project? How do we know this is really affecting the marketplace as something we've built? And so it's important to take a look at that and say, is this really moving the needle? We just spent X million dollars of development time on this. Is this worth the maintenance cost of continuing? And so when these two things work together, you start to create a very judicial, right, thoughtful system that really focuses on the things that are going to be successful. That 10 to 40% of things that will really move the needle. And on top of that, for your customers, you create a product that really it's all about winning, right? This is where you start to hit, that Kano principle of like really being delightful. Now you're starting to build things that people just really love. And all of a sudden you have a lot of raving fans and it's way less to keep maintained.
Do you have an example of something? Maybe it's of a company that you know of. Maybe it's something that is part of your work from the past. Do you have an example of something where it's a product, it's a feature, it's an idea, and you've applied this survival framework to it? and what the impact of that was. Like, I'd just love to better, like, kind of practically give like an example so people could kind of see how it works.
Sure. Let's call this company Bobco. And Bobco was going through a terrible streak of releasing products. They went from a very positive balance sheet where they were making money. This was a non-venture backed company. They were doing very well, and they decided to expand and focus on a whole bunch of brand new technologies. They committed sin number one, which is, their stomachs, or their mouths were too big for their stomachs, or whatever that saying is, right? Like, they just, we have everything. Their eyes are too big for their stomachs. There we go. Right. And so they started getting and picking everything. So what they could do, what they couldn't do, all the new stuff, all the cool stuff. And after 2 years, they went from a positive, net positive balance sheet to laying off half of their employees. Right. Just that fast. And when survival metrics was applied to this company, right, it took some time, some understanding, some learning over the first 6 to 9 months of getting an idea of kind of why they made that mistake. It's one big retro of understanding culture and understanding the decisions that drove the company down that path. Being able to institute survival metrics did 3 things. One, when looking at features, one thing survival metrics really forces a company to do is to be very clear about the story that they're telling. Because if you have things that are, if you have something that somebody can come into a room and say, we're stopping this immediately, right? That stop better be very clear, because human nature it tells you that everyone's going to go, right? They're going to get very upset. And so by doing that, they killed more products in a 6 months period than they ever had as a company before, right? So we're talking about running lean right here. The other thing is you're going to have better communication between teams. Because again, if somebody can walk in there and go, stop, people are going to go, who do you have the right to say that? Right. Which causes a lot of friction. And again, not just for a product manager, but for anybody. And so being able to go talk and understand the incentives across a company allowed people to get closer. And from the leadership level, allowed them to see their values being translated into these particular metrics. So another benefit was a lack of poop and swoop, right? And for those who don't know what poop and swoop is, it's when an executive comes by, usually a product manager's desk, and goes, you know what I really like? I think we should change our pricing page. I think I think we can really hit our goals if we just change our pricing page. Don't worry about it. It's just an idea, just thought, right? And some kind of passive aggressive walk away. Usually that's like the CEO of the company or some high-end executive. And then that product manager spends the next 2 to 3 weeks really focusing on doing that. And then the CEO comes back around and goes, what about this other project that we were working on? Well, I put that aside for 2 weeks because I had to work on the pricing page, right? By seeing the values that they think about and talk about when they're talking to the company writ large, relayed in those survival metrics that they see, right? They're visible. It's less of that, right? They know that their values are being applied. And then lastly, right, if you have that visibility from all sides, people get really interested in the data. So if you're a data ignorant organization, you're going to start to become data driven and then ultimately a data informed organization. And the difference between those groups, right? Data ignorant is an organization that, it clicks, it works, right? Versus data driven is like, the numbers say that, we're going to go that way, right? Versus a data informed organization is, we're going to go that way, not just because the data says so. We have some information, some context around why this is important for us strategically. And we have some customer anecdotes that help us understand why the data is going that way. And we're able to tell that story effectively throughout the organization. So by implementing the survival metrics at Bobco, the company was able to stabilize and grow, right? They were able to hire in a way that they hadn't been in a long time. They were able to get different products out the door and expand their product portfolio while also getting rid of a lot of the junk that was there previous, right? They started getting rid of some of the things that weren't bringing in money, and they started getting rid of the ideas that just didn't work. And people talked to each other a lot more. And I think the thing that I loved seeing when going into their offices was when I first started going in there, everybody was in their own silos and groups. Leave me alone. One day I walked in and I saw a designer talking to a support person, which never happened before. And I saw a marketer talking to an engineer and a product person talking to an executive. Like, you start seeing these connections start to happen because people are starting to talk and engage on the same field. They're playing the same game. So they're allowed to bring their best selves, their best skills to the work that they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love that example. And, thinking about this as just having a common language, I found that, being in UX, being in design, being in product, whatever role you're in, you have a language. And that language often doesn't translate to other functions in the way that you think it does. And so having shared vernacular, shared language, shared metrics. It sounds so simple, but I've seen it so many times where there's so much misalignment unless that exists.
And that's super big at feature factories, right? Because the focus becomes less about what outcomes are we going after, which is going to cause some sense of control, right? There has to be some understanding of the value that you're giving out. Success equals value in an outcomes-driven organization, whereas in an output-driven organization, success equals delivery. And so if your success is based on delivery, then all this other stuff is a waste of time. Why even talk, right? I have a lot of other things. I have a bunch of things. I got 25 OKRs. I got a bunch of things over here that I need to do. I got a bunch of features that I promised on the roadmap that I got to go get shipped. And who cares? Who cares about anything else? My promise to the company is I'm going to ship those things. And so all this other stuff goes out the window. And what starts off as it's like a rock hitting your windshield, right? It starts with a tiny crack. And then it starts to spread and spread and spread. And next thing you know, nobody talks and everybody thinks everybody else is the problem.
So let's say you've developed your survival metrics and you've developed your success metrics. I guess, what's your perspective on how often should you be checking in on them, making sure, are these still the right things for us? Or do you think that those things stay fairly static over time?
No. These things change, right? Success metrics may have a pretty long half-life. However, survival metrics may not, right? Organizations are complex systems. Things change, new executives come in, new regulations start to happen. And so I think it's important for a team to check in whenever they check in, just regularly. So what this looks like in practice is, let's say you have a sprint planning session, perfect time to go over, great, the survival metrics, and just have a quick conversation. Are these still relevant? Is there anything that anybody wants to bring up that may change these things? If so, let's have a quick conversation about them, right? Maybe something moved from pivot to stop. Maybe something needs to be taken off completely because it's not important anymore, right? For example, maybe it was important for operations to keep the AWS bill down. But maybe last week we raised a whole bunch of money and they're really trying to push, right? And there's no need to worry about the AWS bill. We're going to go calculate that after, because right now we're just really caring about the margins. We're not caring about our initial costs, right? We're caring about what profits we can drive and what we can sell Wall Street on. And so that's a huge change, right? If your survival metrics are around your AWS spend, now that's not relevant anymore. And so that needs to go. And something can either take its place or not.
Got it. All right. I think we are going to move into our lightning questions. So these are questions we ask every guest that comes on the show. They're meant to be sort of fun and fast paced. So here we go. What's a book that you've recently read that you would recommend to listeners?
The Lean Enterprise.
That's different from the Lean Startup?
It is different from the Lean Startup. I think for B2B leaders, I think it's a lot of great information there for folks to pick up about how to think about those concepts in a B2B format. And I've gotten to know one of the authors, Barry O'Reilly, somewhat well over the last year or so. And Barry's just the well of knowledge, right? Even though that book was written maybe 6-7 years ago, it's still very effective.
Awesome. Thanks for that recommendation. How about a piece of advice that you might give someone who's trying to convince others to invest in customer feedback?
Go do it yourself for a second. Come back with some really cool insights. Make a nice little video presentation and show somebody over 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, what you found out. Right. And because one thing I've learned over my career, especially as it relates to customer feedback and insights, is people want to know what customers are doing. Right. It's very rare that somebody just goes, I don't care what customers say. Right. We all have some awareness that customers are the ones that pay our salaries. And so I think what comes down to folks, why they tend to avoid it is they think it's time, like it's a huge time investment. And so if you show them how cool it can be and what insights you can get in a short time period, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, then you can start to do things like, hey, maybe I'm doing some analysis on this. You want to come with me? And I'd love your input. Or, hey, I'm talking to this customer. You want to come on by and, just observe and see what our customers think? I'm building out this research study. I'd like your feedback on what are these questions that I'm asking? Or like, this is kind of the goal of what we understand. Does this make sense? Right. And you start to pull in people bit by bit. And so, all these things are just easy ways to get people excited as much as we are around customer feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this idea of just diving in and exposing people to it versus asking, begging, hoping for permission and budget to do it. It's a good tip and one that's, again, fairly, it makes a ton of sense, but rarely, do we see that actually happening. When you think about the future of product management, what are you most excited about?
I think we're at an interesting precipice with product. And we have two choices, right? One, we can go down this professionalization route, which is boring. Who cares? You went to HBS. Who cares? That's not to say I don't love HBS. Actually, like Melissa Perry is a great friend. And I know she's a fantastic teacher of all this stuff. But I mean, in general, right, for professional product people, or we can go down another route. We can start to bring in a mix of folks, because one thing that was true about product before it became this kind of sexy job was product was a place where a lot of pirates worked, a lot of oddballs that weren't particularly good enough at their jobs, but not great and not in love with it. And then they found product and they fell in love with it. Whether it's a customer success person or engineer or a designer. And so these are now the folks that are becoming leaders and having to deal with people that have this wonderful resume of a whole bunch of wonderful schools on it, but within a sense of arrogance that comes with it, and not falling in love with it as we did. And so I think there's an opportunity for product leaders to push back on the want of what I call heuristic bingo, which is let me go hire the person that I'm not going to get fired for hiring. Let me go hire the person that went to Yale or went to Stanford. No. They will be fine. I guarantee you. There's a place at Facebook waiting for them, right? Let's go hire some of the more oddballs, right? Some of the people, bring them in for interviews, talk to them, right? Because this is a discipline built on apprenticeship, and we can really expand on that as tech grows. And so, for companies and teams doing this with APM programs rolling out. I know, there's a few companies that I'm close to that are starting and thinking about this a lot. This is really cool because it's going to bring a whole lot more perspective from people that may not have a college degree, but may be perfect for product. And that's the opportunity. That's when this really gets really, really cool.
Yeah, I love that. It's takes a page out of the book of making sure that you are, building a team with diverse backgrounds and perspectives and not hiring everybody from the same school or program, looking at different life experiences that help inform, their perspective and what value they'll bring to the organization and to the product.
100%.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Adam, for joining me today on the Human Insight podcast. It was super fun chatting with you and learned a ton. And I know our listeners will get a lot of value from this episode. So thanks so much.
This was a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you liked it, please share it with a friend or coworker. If you think it could have been better, let us know. Email us at podcast@usertesting.com. Thanks.